Hi everybody, welcome. Good to see you guys. Just here as usual, a little early for our last lecture meeting until next week's final. So welcome one and all. Glad to have you guys here. And we'll just get started at 1, but hopefully you guys are doing really well and your finals and other classes are all going smooth. Yeah, that's about it. We're going to do our second installment of the review session right now. So we have a pretty straightforward and clear plan for today. Hello. Cool. Hi guys, anybody arriving, feel free to say hello. And just got a couple more minutes until class. Okay. All right, got the study guide pulled up here. And all my notes. So, ready to roll whenever 1 o'clock comes around. Welcome back, everybody. Hi, kitty. My cat's here. Hey. Just off stage. Hey, kitty. Want to come up here? Kitty? No? Hello, Yai. How are you? Good to see you. Hello, Heather. Hi, Eduardo. Good to see you too. About 3 minutes. Yeah, kitties, they're saying hello. Hi, Peter. I'm telling you, this quarantine is like the highlight of my cat's life. She's never been so happy. I've heard that cats have a reputation for being very independent and they're not so clingy and all that like dogs, but that's not at all the case with this cat, at least. So I just don't know about those rumors. This cat gets very depressed if I'm not even here for like 30 minutes or an hour. It's just out of control. But she's a good kitty. All right, guys, just a few minutes and we'll be all set. Thanks for being here. Feel free to say hello if you have not already. This is our last live stream of the semester, so we've made it all the way to the end. Survived this really weird COVID semester together. So congratulations on that. But we still have one last piece of business to attend to, and that is you guys' final. So we'll make sure to get prepared today and get you guys set. Almost time, so just get us mentally ready to go. One second, I'm gonna get my beverage. Hi, Thomas, Peter, Sammy, and everybody else. Hello to you guys. So it's 1 o'clock. So let's go ahead and start. Hi, everybody. If you haven't said hello, feel free to drop a comment and say hi. Today's part 2 of the review session. So basically on Monday, we went over all of the study guide questions from the midterm and before. And today, the goal is to go over the second half of the study guide, the one that I sent to you guys this week, to get you guys covered on all the information post-midterm. So I have my study guide pulled up here on my phone. I would advise you, if you're following along here in this review session, to get your copy, handy. Either pull it up on your computer or some other device, or if you have a printed copy, obviously you can use that. But that's going to guide us through today's meeting. So it is the last meeting of the semester until you guys take your final, but that's not a live stream, so I guess it's the last time we'll have this little electronic interaction where I'm talking and sending you the camera footage. It's been a great semester with you guys, and I really appreciate all of your dedication and hard work sticking with it to the end. It's a semester that I'm sure all of us will always remember. I feel a little bit bonded with the students that we had to go through this together with this semester. So, it's a sad thing that's happening in the world with COVID, but we've done the best that we could, and therefore I think you guys are really strong and very capable, and it's going to be to your benefit in the end that you're able to see your way through this. But I want to make one reminder also. I know that I forgot to mention it before, but this is my last chance to say it to you in a live stream. So there are evaluations that are done every semester for every class, and this, normally is done by means of the professor coming in with a packet of review materials that you would then fill out on paper and submit to the department, and that would be the way that the evaluations would be given. But anyway, since we're not in a face-to-face format anymore, I think they've said that you guys have been receiving emails and stuff encouraging you to fill out the online questionnaire about these classes. So I would just try to give you a reminder. It's valuable to all of us when you guys fill those out. So I would just hope that you could take a moment or two when you have some free time this week, because I think the window of time expires at the conclusion of Friday. So, if you haven't already done it, maybe it would be a great favor to me if you would just be willing to fill out the evaluation at some point the next day or two. Certainly before Friday, that would be great. So yeah, fill it out. Let us know what you think. For what it's worth, I try my best to do the best job I possibly can for you guys as a professor. I really value the experience of being able to give back and to be a part of your education, because my college experience and my educational pathway has opened all the doors for me. So it's a good feeling to be able to give back. I really care about my students. Sometimes I have to show a little tough love in terms of the way I have to give you guys your grades, but I'm always trying to be fair and as generous as possible. So anyway, that's what I would say to you guys. Whatever you end up doing for the rest of your lives from here, I really do wish you well, and I'm glad that we had this chance to at least interact a little bit, and that I could be one small part of your bigger picture in life and your education and your future goals. So, that's really heartfelt, and that's what I'm saying to you. That's what I usually always say at the end of a semester when we're in class, but I'm just sending that message to you here across the live stream. So take that to heart and be willing to fill out those evaluations. It'd be a good thing, and I really would appreciate it. But other than that, let's just go ahead and let's move into our evaluation. Sorry, not evaluation. What is kind of evaluation? The evaluation of the second half of the semester material, our review. Okay, so I'm looking at the review sheet here, and let's just start at the top if you guys don't mind. So the middle with those questions on fallacies. So first of all, it says, what is a fallacy? What do you think? What is a fallacy? A fallacy is a logical error or a flaw in an argument. And because it has that flaw or that error, it makes it a weak argument. It makes it a defective argument. So that's really all it is. A fallacy is a logical flaw within an argument. And because of the flaw, it's a now weak argument. It could be because the premises no longer provide the proper support to the conclusion, or that they are not relevant to the conclusion, or that they contain assumptions which are not based on justifying this argument with a logical flaw in it. Okay. Now, as I'm going over these terms and these concepts, sometimes I'll ask you for a little feedback so that I can see you're tracking me, and sometimes I'll just talk through it. We're just going to go in that same order. And if you do have any questions, if I'm saying something that you're not clear about, or you would like me to repeat or clarify, please just chime in the question, or sorry, in the live chat, and I'll definitely in real time help out and give you any further information you need. One more thing I guess I should mention, because I kind of wanted to say this. Last meeting, we had that one, I guess, or I don't know, trolling attempt of the live stream. Maybe if you were watching it, you could have seen that there were some people coming in from wherever, trying to throw things off a little bit by making weird comments. And anyway, we pretty much shut them down, and it was easy for me to block them and delete their comments. But there was this one individual who had the username Jessica Patton, and that was not a student in our class, which I was able to determine and verify afterwards. So when they were like making their silly comments about cough, cough, I have COVID, that's not a real student. That's not anybody from our class. So never worry about that. Trolls are out there. Don't feed the trolls. Don't be a troll. But just another little point to mention. Okay. So as we go on from there, the second question, what is a fallacy of ambiguity? So we talked about 3 categories of fallacies. There was ambiguity, relevance, and unwarranted assumption. So the definition of the first category, fallacy of ambiguity. These are fallacies. These are when an argument contains sloppy grammar, ambiguous words, or a confusion between 2 similar concepts. Okay, so that is what a fallacy of ambiguity is. It's a type of fallacy. It has to do with ambiguity, And to specify and clarify that, it's just whenever the argument has got ambiguous words, confusing or sloppy grammar, or a confusion between two similar concepts. Okay. So, equivocation. What is that? It's the fallacy which occurs when what happens? When you've got what? What's equivocation? If anyone can tell me really briefly what that word means. What is equivocation? It's a type of fallacy. It's a fallacy of ambiguity, but which one is it and what's the definition? Let's just see if you know that one, and then we'll go from there. Equivocation, anybody? Easy to find in your notes or in the book, or just your memory. Yayi. When a key term appears more than once in an argument with different meanings, exactly. Okay, so like for example, let's see. The baseball player didn't make it home. Home is where you live. And so the baseball player never made it to where he lives. Okay, that looks like it could make sense, but the word home could be used in two different senses. In the first case, meaning that he didn't make it home, like he didn't make it to home base. I guess he struck out or something, or, you know, whatever. He made like a partial way around the bases, but he didn't get all the way back home, complete a run. The second thought, there are more important cases where the same kind of fallacy is committed, so just know that. That's equivocation. Okay, so from there, amphibole. What is amphibole fallacy? This is the fallacy of grammatical ambiguity. So when some grammatical ambiguity makes it that we don't know what conclusion to draw. If I tell you, let's see, Bill and Ted were talking about his dog. This is grammatically ambiguous as a statement because the word his is a male pronoun, but there are two named male subjects, and thus it becomes ambiguous to whom the claim that they're talking about his dog is referring to. If I say to you that most people like dogs, but they sometimes are not nice. Most people like dogs, but they sometimes are not nice. Now, in this case, the word they is a plural pronoun, but we've said most people, which could be referred to by they. And we've also most people like dogs, and dogs is a class of things which could be referred to by they. So when it is said that most people like dogs, but sometimes they're not nice, it's not clear whether the person is talking about some dogs are not nice or whether some of the people who like dogs are not nice. Okay, so it's just a few examples of amphibole that I'm coming up with off the top of my head there. Fallacy of accent. What is that? That's when, by placing an emphasis or a stress on certain words in a statement or an argument, you change the original meaning of the statement or the argument. So, I don't know, like if somebody said, we're gonna have grandma for dinner, you know, like the parent says that to the child. And then later on, the child like bites the grandma and they're like, why'd you do that? And he said, we said that we're gonna have grandma for dinner. And by emphasizing the word grandma, it makes it seem as if, you know, that she was gonna be the item to eat instead of the person you're hosting. So anyways, accent fallacy. I told you don't play with matches. Why did you burn down the garage? I know, but I wasn't playing with matches. You don't play with matches. This wasn't playing. I was just setting things on fire very seriously and deliberately. Okay, so accent fallacy, guys. From there, there were two more of the fallacies of ambiguity. So there was division and composition. Okay, so what is the division fallacy? Basically, it's when you say that there is a group or a class of things that has a certain feature, and then an individual member of the group is identified, and then the erroneous conclusion is that that one person must have the same feature which is seen in the whole group. So the United States is the most powerful country. I am a citizen of the United States. Therefore, I am the most powerful person. But that's not necessarily true. You can be a member of a collective, which is in the big picture very powerful or wealthy, but not every single big. Room 101 is a room of the hotel, therefore room 101 is big. No, not necessarily, because you can have a big hotel where each part of it is small, like with each room being small. So those are division fallacies. Now the composition fallacy is just the reverse case, where you say not that a group has a feature, but that an individual has a feature. And then it is mentioned afterward that this individual is a member of some group. Then the false or fallacious conclusion is that the whole or the group must have the same feature of the individual. So, I don't know, I am a professor, I am a United States citizen, therefore all United States citizens are professors. This is not really accurate, okay? Just because one person is who happens to be a member of the United States, that doesn't mean that every single person that is a member of the United States has the same features. The cells in my body cannot be seen without a microscope. And I am formed by those cells, so therefore I cannot be seen without a microscope. But that obviously is false as well. So composition starts with an assumption about a member of a group, and then concludes with a statement that says the whole group or the collective has the same property, and that's not always necessarily true. So those are the first 5 fallacies under the ambiguity category. And I guess with that, we can go on to the next. So the next question is, what is a fallacy of relevance? What is a fallacy of relevance? Who could tell me that? Fallacy of relevance? What kind of fallacy is that? It's when the argument, what? Fallacy of relevance, anybody? Just want to throw that out there at me? Yeah, well, okay, that's a good start. Yayi. So it is when the premises of the argument are not relevant or are not related to the conclusion. Okay, so you've got an argument which has a conclusion. It's where the premises just don't have the right kind of connection to the conclusion. They're not relevant to it. And there's a whole list of them. So let's go over them. First of all, ad hominem fallacy. Ad hominem. This is also sometimes called the personal attack fallacy. What is ad hominem? When the ad hominem fallacy is committed, what happens? It's when a person does what? So they don't like someone's argument, they don't like someone's claim. And then when they commit this fallacy, what do regarding the person who made the claim? What is ad hominem? What is this personal attack fallacy? Let me see what you know about that. That's one of the big ones. I think that's probably one of the major ones that is easy to remember, so I'm kind of asking you about it. Walden, when someone attacks their opponent personally instead of their argument. Exactly, perfect. So somebody says to you, you know, we need this lockdown to be extended a little bit longer because it's a public health imperative. If we reopen the economy too quickly, we'll suffer devastating losses of human life. What do you say about my argument? The person says, well, you know, here's the problem with your argument. I mean, just look at you. You're dressed like so tacky. I mean, your outfit is like the worst outfit I've seen. So you don't know what you're talking about. That's not really a response, though, to their argument. It's not really challenging any of their evidence. It's just saying, hey, you're a person that I'm going to attack for making that argument. And that's no way to argue. Leveling insults, making fun of people, instead of trying to report on why their claim is false and what their evidence is, what's faulty about their evidence, that would be a fallacy of ad hominem or personal attack. Okay, good. Now, next up, appeal to force. Appeal to force, aka scare tactic. That is pretty simple. That's just when you threaten a person or actually use force of some kind in an effort to get them to change their mind or to back off of their position or to accept your position. So, you know, the parent is talking to the child and they're just talking about current day issues. Child says, everyone's rushing to reopen the schools and the economy, but I'm worried about that because of what I'm hearing from public health experts. And the parent's like, that's nonsense. And if you keep talking like that, you know, I'm going to ground you for like a week, or I'm going to stop paying your tuition, or, you know, I'm going to take the keys from your car so you can't drive. Now, in that case, the parent's trying to change the child's mind, but not by telling him why their argument is bad. Instead, just by using force, some kind of pressure, some intimidation or threat. So that would be appeal to force, scare tactic. Employers could do it, parents could do it, people in a position of authority could, because they know they can use the leverage they have over you to try and get you to hold the opinion they want. Okay, so good. Then next up would be appeal to pity. All right, appeal to pity is also, I think, straightforward case. That's where you invoke or rely on feelings of pity in order to get some kind of special treatment or favor. But the concept is that it's not really relevant to the circumstances. So if a student comes to me and they say, I'm sorry my essay is 2 weeks late, but I read like a really sad novel and it's been haunting me for the whole time period. I mean, that I guess could be sad, but it's not really a relevant consideration in terms of being expected to live up to the formal rules of the class. If a person was speeding on the freeway or the road and the police officers, cited them and they just said, well, look, I mean, I'm sad right now because I had a pet for a long time that just passed away and that I'm not paying attention to my driving. That would be appeal to pity. Okay, murder. So that would be another case. It's kind of like an appeal to emotion, but they just define it in the textbook as appeal to pity. Okay, good. So we're moving ahead. Popular appeal. Popular appeal is simply when, to try and win an argument or to make a claim, you appeal to popular opinion. You say, well, most people think this, or this is what the majority think, or this is what the popular crowd thinks. Therefore, it must be true. But that's another fallacy. In order to defend the claim that something's true, good, or right, you have to give evidence why it is true or good or right. You can't just say, oh, it's because it's popular. The view that slavery should be abolished was perhaps not popular at one point in time among, free citizens of this country, and that doesn't mean that at that point it was not a bad thing. If you just survey a group of people, sometimes people have horrendous views, even a majority of them. So you can't always just link your opinions to what's popular at a given time. You need better evidential support or basis. Good. Then appeal to ignorance. So the appeal to ignorance fallacy is when you claim that something is true just because it has not been proven false. So it's like trying to use the absence of contrary evidence as somehow proof that a thing is true. If I told you Bigfoot exists because can you prove that he doesn't? That's appeal to ignorance. If I tell you God exists because you can't prove otherwise, that would also be appeal to ignorance. Now, that doesn't mean that Bigfoot or God don't exist. And sometimes people do that. People will, like, for example, someone might say, this virus, I think it was man-made because we can't prove where it actually did come from. But that's not the same thing as actually having substantial evidence which indicates that that is true. So you need affirmative evidence to justify a claim. You cannot just have nobody's shown that it's false. Okay, good. So far, so good, everybody. Just checking in with you. Am I going at a pace that's reasonable for you? Can you follow my notes? I know I'm not using the board right now. That's because I want to get through a lot of material fast. It's also because we've taken these notes before and you have access to the book. And since you can replay this at your leisure at any later time, I think that it's going to be the best use of our time for me to just kind of talk through these concepts. But thank you guys for the feedback. I appreciate that, Sammy and Eduardo. So very good. Okay, guys, so let's just continue. We have more. Then next up, it's hasty generalization. So what is a hasty generalization fallacy? When a person makes a universal statement, but they jump to that conclusion too quickly, too hastily. So it's when you come to a all conclusion based on limited evidence, a sample that is either too small or biased. So if I had, like, let's say, read on the news that a pit bull attacked a child, that's a bad thing. But suppose that I just used that and then jumped from that one example to the sweeping general conclusion that all pit bulls are vicious. That might not be a fair conclusion based on the one example given. If you, I don't know, had a negative experience with a specific type of person, and you just use that one experience to paint with a broad brush all people of that kind. That could be a hasty generalization too. You know, so sometimes things just happen, but they don't repeat. And sometimes things happen and they're not typical of the ordinary case. So 1 or 2 or 3 cases is usually not enough to generalize from. And you also got to make sure that you're deriving your evidence from a sample that is representative of the facts. So that's another case of a fallacy, hasty generalization. As we go on from there, a couple more on this category. So next it's strawman. What is a strawman fallacy? So that is when you take your opponent's actual argument, but you rephrase it in a way that makes it seem worse than it actually is. So it's when you exaggerate or misrepresent your opponent's argument in order to make it seem easy to debunk or easy to refute. So like if a person said, I don't know, like, let's extend this lockdown through the summer as a public health measure, and then we can start to slowly reopen the economy once we see our curve flattening. What do you say to my argument? And the other person says, oh, well, your argument's out of control because you're telling us let's never ever open the economy again and just all quit our jobs. But if that happens, then there's going to be like an apocalyptic crash of the global financial system. But in that case, you know, the person is taking what they actually said, like something moderate and limited, and made it seem like extreme and radical so that it would be easy to just blow out of the water. So that's strawman. Strawman is called strawman because you're supposed to have the image in your mind of like a person attacking not the real enemy or opponent. I should not say enemy because that's like too charged, but the intellectual opponent is not the one that's being attacked, but rather some kind of fake version of what they said, like a scarecrow. So the strawman is like supposed to denote not the real person's view, but this overhyped or oversimplified version of their actual view. So you're not replying to the real person, but the strawman version of what they said. Somebody says maybe marijuana should be legalized because it's not as addictive and it doesn't have the same kind of health risks as many of the other federally Schedule I drugs. Someone says, oh, so if you had it actually was, it didn't go as far as all that. So there's a lot of cases where people commit strawman. I think it was funny in some of your guys' commercial assignments, I saw at least a few submissions which had this old Wendy's commercial where these old ladies are looking at the hamburger from Wendy's and they're like, where's the beef? It's not a Wendy's commercial, it's a Carl's Jr. commercial, I think. But anyway, it's like, where's the beef? And they're looking at this Wendy's patty with it's got this microscopic hamburger on it. That's, of course, a misrepresentation of what they actually sell. So it makes it seem like they're normal-sized patties offered by Carl's Jr. or whatever, or Burger King. I can't remember the actual vendor, but that those are really good and substantial. But of course, they're misrepresenting their opponent's product. Okay, so good. Then next up, red herring. Red herring is the fallacy that happens when you basically try to switch up the topic of the discussion to shift it to more favorable ground. Wendy's that was attacking Burger King. Okay, good, Eduardo. Didn't want to get those facts wrong, but it's a famous ad from like I think the late 80s. Where's the beef? Kind of back then, it became a pop culture reference, that little quote. But anyway, yeah. Did we say red herring? Yeah, so red herring is when you're trying to distract from the main focus of the discussion. Like if somebody said, coronavirus is our #1 problem, and if we don't get that under control, then we're going to have big problems economically and otherwise for the next few years. And then another person says, no, I do not agree with you. You're saying coronavirus is a big problem, but if you ask me, the bigger problem is climate change. Well, okay, but that's not the same topic. So you're trying to dismiss their argument by bringing up something else. That would be a red herring. Now, red herring is called red herring because we used to train, or we still, I guess, train hunting dogs by means of these smelly fish called herrings. And the dog's supposed to retrieve the actual fallen prey that you're hunting and bring it back to you, like playing fetch. But if they're not so well trained, they could easily be distracted by these herrings that you strategically place at certain angles away. And a well-trained dog will not be thrown off by the scent of the herring, but stay focused on its original intended target. So in this sort of metaphorical way of describing argument and logic, when you're engaged in logical debate or whatever over a topic, you're not supposed to allow the person to distract you by bringing up side or secondary issues. That would be red herring. Okay. Cool. So next is the fallacies of unwarranted assumption. Yeah. Fallacies of unwarranted assumption. What are they? Those are fallacies which contain assumptions that are not justified or warranted based on evidence. So that's basically it. They've got assumptions built into them that are not based on anything. They're not based on evidence anyway. So what are these different examples of fallacies of unwarranted assumption? First of all, there is begging the question. Now, what do you know is begging the question? Begging the question is the fallacy that happens when what? Maybe you could tell me. What is the definition there? Begging the question, circular argument, if that helps to jog your memory. What is a begging the question fallacy concept? Okay, Eduardo. When one of the premises of the argument is a reworded, say rewarded, but reworded version of the conclusion. Yes. Yeah. So it's basically when the conclusion and one of the premises is the same statement, just slightly different terminology used. So like if I told you that abortion is bad because it's wrong to end a pregnancy, that's a circular argument, because when one says it's wrong to end a pregnancy and that's the conclusion, and you're asking, okay, well, what's the evidence for the conclusion? And the person says, well, the reason is because abortion is wrong. Abortion is ending a pregnancy. And saying something's wrong is to say that it's, you know, bad or whatever. So in that case, the premise doesn't offer independent reason for the conclusion. It just is the conclusion. If I say, I mean, just very directly, the death penalty is wrong because the death penalty is wrong, I hope you would understand that that's not the best argument anybody could give, because it's not really giving a reason. It's saying it's wrong because it's wrong. So you have to give reasons when you give a conclusion. The reasons, though, cannot be the same thing as the conclusion. And sometimes a cleverly worded premise, which is not immediately detected as synonymous with the conclusion, can pass by and escape your notice, and then you would be tricked or manipulated by the begging the question fallacy. So like, I don't know, if your parents said, you know, I want you to major in business, and you ask them why, and they're like, because you ought to major in business. You know, that's not giving you a reason. And they could be giving you reasons, and then they'd be making a reasonable argument. But just saying you should because it's what you ought to do is just saying the same thing over again. Okay, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with business. I'm just giving you an example, obviously. Okay, good guys. So that's begging the question. Next up, inappropriate appeal to authority. What is that? That's when you try to rely on the opinion of an authority figure to support your argument or to support your conclusion. But the problem is this person is not really an authority on that topic. So it's when you try to appeal to the opinion or view of some authority figure on to generate support for your conclusion. But problem, that person's not really an expert or an authority on the topic. So like, my dentist said that it's time to sell all my stocks, therefore I really should do that. But that's not the best argument, because the dentist is a specialist in matters of dentistry, not in financial planning or investment. And I guess the opposite could be said. You know, my financial planner said that I should go and get some fillings. You'd probably want to rely on your dentist for that information. So we do have to rely on expertise and authoritative knowledge, but it's got to be in the proper subject area. If you say, my philosophy professor, Dr. Vulich, said that, you know, I don't know, like, that helium is one of the heavier elements in the periodic table, you'd be relying on my expertise, but I'm not an expert in chemistry or anything having to do with chemicals. So, I mean, my expertise is related to logic, argument, philosophy, and the history of ideas, but there are many other fields where I have no knowledge or expertise. So authority in one area doesn't transfer over to authority in every area, even if you have distinguished titles like doctor, professor, lieutenant, president, or anything else. Okay. I know a lot of people have made comments about, like, you know, I'm relying on the testimony of a political leader in a public health discussion, and Perhaps that could be an example. I don't know. Okay, so then let's go on. Loaded question, yeah? What's the loaded question fallacy? Maybe you could just tell me definition of that. Let's see what you can remember. That one I think is pretty easy. What's loaded question? How's that fallacy go? It has to do with asking a question, but what kind of question? If it's this fallacy. Okay, so yes, when you ask a question that assumes the answer to a different question that you did not ask exactly yes. Can anybody think of an example of one of those? Maybe you could just throw one out there and then I can use your example. Loaded question. Like what would be a question like that? When does the baby due? Okay, Peter, you seem to remember my earlier anecdote. Yes. If you ask this question to a person to whom you are not aware of pregnant, you should ask that first, I guess. Yeah. How many partners have you had? You know, that could be a loaded question. Maybe the person has never had one. You know, or what's your favorite type of alcoholic drink? Maybe you don't drink alcohol. And so this question is a loaded question also. Sometimes people try to commit you to things by asking loaded questions, like, when are we going to hang out? You know, if you don't really want to hang out with this person, then they're trying to rope you into the obligation by asking that leading question. And sometimes in a court of law, or when you're dealing with officers of the law, they may try to entrap you with such questions, like just, did you know how fast you were speeding? Well, if you don't believe you were speeding, then you probably just shouldn't say, I'm not sure, because then you're already conceding the point that you did and you're just not aware of how fast it was. Okay, so loaded question. That's a good, another discussion. So we go on. False dilemma. False dilemma, anybody? So what is that? That's when there are, it's a complex issue, but it gets oversimplified to just two either or choices. So when a person reduces the responses to a complex issue or topic to two binary, the far right or the extreme left, you know, and you might say, okay, that's a false dilemma. I'm neither camp. If somebody says to you, I don't know, do you love America or do you hate it? That's another extreme polarized set of options where there are obviously many intermediate possibilities besides. So false dilemma happens when people try to, you know, oversimplify things to just two possibilities, but in fact there are so many more. Okay, I don't know, I guess one could ask or say, is this person straight or are they gay? And you might argue, oh, there's so many different orientations which exist apart from those. Or is this a man or a woman? I mean, you know, obviously when we talked about gender identity and fluidity among those norms, people could argue that those are false dilemmas too. Okay, so questionable cause. This is when a person assumes that one thing is the cause of another, but without very good reason or evidence to link the two. So a lot of times when people have superstitious beliefs, something happened and something else happened afterward, and they just assume that because the first event was first, that it must have been the cause of the second one, but not always true. So when you assess a causal connection between cause and effect, you need very strong evidence to link the two things up. It can't just be like, well, one thing happened first, and then I assume that it must have caused the later thing. There has to be better evidential support for that. So, I mean, if a black cat crosses your path and then something not so nice happens to you, it would be a questionable cause fallacy for you to just go on and say, that was the reason. Okay. Slippery slope. This is the one where a person says that if one type of action is either taken or permitted, that means that eventually all actions of that type will either be taken or allowed. And it's usually described in terms of the actions that follow from the first one getting worse and worse and worse as time goes on. You know, so like maybe it seems innocent enough to, I don't know, give in to your dog or cat complaining about wanting a specific type of food. But if you give up that one time and just give them their favorite treat, then they're eventually going to demand it all the time, and you'll never be able to modify or moderate their behavior later. Maybe if we start to develop artificial intelligence, it seems like a good idea today, but down the line, we're setting ourselves up for a world where machines are too smart and they take over the planet and they enslave us. Maybe somebody thinks that if we, I don't know, experiment one time with like a drink of alcohol, that's putting us on a slippery slope towards absolute addiction and alcoholism. So don't even do the one drink. So anyway, those are all slippery slopes. The kind of idea in your mind should be that there's a person standing atop a steep hill and they're being told and warned not to take any steps, because if you do take the one step, it's going to cascade into a downward fall down the slope. Okay, then finally there's naturalistic fallacy. What's that one? That's the one that says that it's just based on the faulty assumption that anything which is natural must be good, and anything that is not natural, not as nature intended, must be bad. So people who hold this type of fallacious thinking would assume that, I don't know, like vaccines are bad, or technology is bad, or certain, like all these medicines and so on are bad because they've been developed artificially, and that anything which is natural, even like tobacco, cocaine, marijuana, things, as long as they grow out of the ground, they're put here by God, and therefore they're here for us and they're good things. But obviously there are many things in nature that are not good, and there are many man-made, not natural things that are good. And you just need a case-by-case examination to make the distinction which one it is. A hurricane comes from nature, and it's bad for us. Medicine, surgery, heart transplants, X-rays, global satellites, internal combustion engine, we could go on and on. But all those things are good, and they didn't exist until mankind invented them. So the naturalistic fallacy is just an oversimplified way of looking at the world. If it's natural, it's good, and if it's not natural, it's bad. But it's not so black and white. Okay, guys. So that is the whole set of review for Chapter 5, okay? And from there, we just have a little bit more to go over, a couple more chapters to review. So just taking stock of where we are right now, we're going to next briefly discuss the 3 things that I talked about in the media chapter. I didn't create a ton of notes on that, so there's not a lot that I wanted you guys to need to remember. But here are a few of them, just 3 questions on media. First of all, what is media literacy? So it's being able to understand the influence of media on us. So it's being able to understand and interact with media and to gauge its influence on us. Then there is product placement. What's product placement? Do you know? Can you just quickly let me know what that one is? Product placement. What is that? It's when they do something in the world of advertising and marketing. But let's see if you could tell me. What is that one? Product placement. When what happens? When an ad is put in a program instead of during the commercials, exactly. So when the product that is being advertised is directly placed in the programming instead of during commercial intermissions or dedicated ads. So it would be like if you're watching a Hollywood film and a consumer product is conspicuously placed in the scenes that are being shown to you in the film. So like Coca-Cola is like appearing in a movie scene, or I don't know, Mercedes-Benz cars, or Apple laptops. When those things happen, it's a clever attempt by the marketing forces of the world to sneak in an ad on you while you're watching your entertaining programming. So it's just an effective tactic of advertisement, but sometimes, we have to be able to see through the attempts of advertisement to get us to buy the products. Okay, and then the last and only 3rd question from that advertisement stuff are, what are 3 main purposes of ads? So there's to create product awareness, there's to provide information about the product, and then there's also to generate consumer demand. So we talked about those 3 as well. Okay. So now we're moving on to chapter 12, everybody. That takes us close to our recent material. Chapter 12 is the science chapter, which you guys just recently did a quiz on. So a whole range of questions on that. First of all, the assumption of unity. Now, let me apologize for one thing. The questions in the chapter 12 study guide are kind of not in the order that they were presented in. I just kind of listed them as I found them in my notes, but it does have a comprehensive list of all the information, so we'll get through all of it once we're done. Anyway, so number one, what's the assumption of unity in science? The assumption of unity is that this universe that we're living in is unified, meaning that it operates according to a single set of scientific laws and principles. So there should be a unified theory of reality that could explain everything from the biggest to the smallest aspects of it. So basically, yeah, that the universe has an underlying unity such that it should be capable of explanation by one set of laws. After that, limitations of science. Okay, this is a question which I had put in the list, but which I kind of think better of a little bit, because it was something that was, I thought, a little bit maybe not as articulately explained in the book as I perhaps would have liked. But as we're on the topic, one limitation of science is that it assumes that the external world even exists, which I guess can't be proven from the internal psychological perspective that you inhabit. So it's assuming the existence of the world, but that's something that can't absolutely be proven. There's another limitation that it can only study the things which are observable. And if there was something not capable of being observed, then that would be difficult for science to ever understand. And some people think that the assumption that the universe is predictable is also something that we can't prove, and so that's a limit. But anyway, not too much to worry about that. There's just, number one, that it's only about things that can be observed, that it assumes the external world exists, and that the belief in predictability is also something that can't be absolutely definitively proven. Okay. What's the scientific method? Well, there's a whole bunch of steps to the scientific method, but the overall thing is that it's a procedure which starts with observation, where you identify some phenomena that's not yet understood. Later, after that, you develop a hypothesis which tries to explain the occurrence of the phenomena, and then eventually you're going to test that hypothesis. So, a procedure to explain a causal connection or phenomena in nature. It starts with observation, it moves on to a hypothesis, and eventually gets to a test. Now, how is the three-step model of critical thinking somehow similar to the scientific method? We talked about that. So connecting something from the first part of the class to the latter part of the class. This critical thinking process goes from experience, interpretation, and then to analysis. And that bears some rough similarities to three major parts of the scientific method, which are observation, hypothesis, and test. The experience stage is just where you say what happened. And the observation stage of the scientific method is just where you observe things and you identify that something has happened, but you don't yet understand why. Also, that's how experience works. You have an experience, but you don't yet try to figure out why it happened. After that, though, the second step kicks in, and it's similar in both cases. In the interpretation side of things, in critical thinking, you try to supply some kind of reasonable explanation of why or how that event happened. And a hypothesis is a lot like that, because that's when you try to give some educated scientific guess as to what the reason is that the observed phenomena happened. And then the third stage of critical thinking is analysis. That's where you reconsider your previous interpretation to see if it's really the right one. And in science, you test your hypothesis at the end. And this test is to see if it's the right hypothesis or not. So putting scrutiny towards your hypothesis is kind of like analyzing your interpretation to see if it's in fact correct. Okay, so that's the similarity that one's talking about. Okay, so after that, it asks this question: what is the first step of scientific method? That's to identify a problem. And that is, to be more specific, to observe the world and observe the world and identify some unexplained phenomena in the world. So basically, you look at the world, you collect some information, and you try and find something that's not yet understood. Why it happens is not yet understood. So you identify that problem. Okay, next question just talks about the second step, which is to develop an initial hypothesis. So that is just when you try to give your initial, meaning your first educated scientific guess to explain the occurrence of the observed problem. Okay, so at least at the beginning, your hypothesis is tentative. It's subject to modification, but basically you've got to give some attempt anyway to judge why did that problem or event happen, which you saw at step 1. Okay, so next it says, what about the last step? Evaluate hypothesis based on the test or experimental results. Okay, so why was the test done? The test was done to see was the hypothesis correct or not. We don't really know if it's correct or not until we create a test to see. The test will reveal that the hypothesis has either been confirmed or disconfirmed. Suppose that the test confirms your hypothesis. So the results of the test are consistent with what the hypothesis would predict. In that case, that's confirmation, and you should then publish the results, and the scientific community will try to replicate those results on their own from other labs and other researchers. But if your hypothesis was disconfirmed by the test procedure, then you would have to go back to step 2 and develop a new hypothesis and keep running through the steps again until eventually the hypothesis which you have is confirmed by the results of the experiment. Okay. So after that, well, yeah, so we talked about testing the hypothesis. That's just when you conduct an experiment which will either confirm or disconfirm that hypothesis. So relevance to the problem under study. That's one of the qualities of a good scientific theory or hypothesis. Basically, it has to be at least related to, relevant to, the subject that you're trying to learn about or to have a correct interpretation of. So a bad hypothesis or theory would be irrelevant to the interest that you have in explaining something. Like if I said that the social anxiety that people feel from the coronavirus is contributing to global warming, that makes no sense because global warming doesn't happen because of thoughts and feelings we have. It has to do with emissions that are in the Earth's atmosphere. So, it's got to be relevant, your hypothesis. After that, what about predictive power? Predictive power is another quality of a good scientific theory or hypothesis. Basically, a good theory is able to be used to make accurate predictions of future events. So since we know a lot about, the motions of the celestial objects in space in our local cosmos, we can make very accurate predictions about the date and time of a future eclipse. Or since meteorology is a very well settled science, we can and do have accurate weather predictions of the future outcome of weather over the near term. Einstein's theory of relativity has very precise predictions about how time dilation should happen when two different clocks are accelerated at different rates of speed. And those are predictions which end up being borne out when experiments are conducted. So predictive power is a good thing when a theory has it, and it just means that the theory is able to be used to accurately predict future events of the same kind. Okay. So from there, who's Copernicus? You could tell me that one. I think you would remember that because it was, on the quiz. But Nicholas Copernicus was which person? What did he do? What was the whole point of mentioning his name? Who could just tell me that one? Copernicus, what's that person? He discovered something big that's important. What was that? Yes, he was the Polish astronomer who discovered the heliocentric model of the solar system. Yeah. And what was the big deal with that? Didn't everybody already think that? No. Before him, the dominant view of many people, and especially the church, was a different view, not heliocentrism, but before Copernicus and Galileo, everybody thought that what? What was the old view? Because that's got to be mentioned in conjunction with what he discovered to give context. So yes, you're right. He discovered heliocentrism, but that replaces what? And also, yeah, so they believed the Earth was the center of everything, and that's called geocentrism. Heliocentrism, so you should always say the meaning of the term. It's the idea that the sun is the center of our local cosmos. Okay, good, Delia. Yeah, so with Copernicus's discovery using new telescopes that had been invented, he was able to prove that the sun's at the middle, not the Earth. That was radical and revolutionary because the church thought that that was totally heretical. You know, they thought that that was almost like a sin to say that, because how could God have built the planet Earth that humans live on, who he created in his image, and just put us in a random position that's not at all in the middle? Shouldn't we be, everything should rotate around us if we're the most important things, if we're the children of God, and we're created by God for the purpose of being his children. Anyway, yeah, it was discovered otherwise, that the sun is the center, not the Earth. And that paved the way for future scientific discoveries that departed from the assumptions of the theologians of the church. Okay. So next up, what's the idea of materialism in science? That's another basic assumption of science. But what is materialism in the scientific sense of the word? It's a viewpoint that everything in this whole universe is what? Materialism, anybody? What's that? Just let me know real quick. What does this word mean in our class in science? From the book, from our previous meetings. Materialism. Made of physical matter, yeah. So it means that it's the belief that everything in the universe is just made out of physical matter. And it's important to include this little item. It's everything including, thoughts, memories, and consciousness. So everything's made out of matter, which reduces to atoms at the ultimate level. Everything's made out of atoms, including human beings and thoughts that we have. So our minds, our mental life, our internal psychological states, they're also just made out of matter. They're made out of the brain, and they're the byproduct of the brain, a physical object, executing its functions. Okay, so that's physicalism, or sometimes it's called materialism. In our book, it's called materialism. Belief that everything's made out of matter, including the mind. Okay, so what is science itself? That's probably a question I should have put at the top, but anyway, of that chapter. But it doesn't matter so much. So science is reasoning from observed facts to testable explanations for those facts. So science is a process where you start off by just observing the world and seeing the things happening. And then you try to go from there to give explanations for those observed facts, explanations which could be tested in order to determine if they are correct explanations. So yeah, reasoning from observed facts to testable explanations for those facts. Okay. Next up, science and religion. The question, the way it's written, I should have maybe been a little more detailed, but I'm asking you there about what are different views that people can and do hold about the relationship of science and religion. So the textbook talked about 4 perspectives. Some people will believe that if science and religion do not agree on something, then you should prioritize the scientific view. So that would be the view that if science and religion don't agree, that science should hold sway, and that science trumps religion when they don't agree. So evolution or creationism. They're saying different things about how human beings came to exist. And if you hold that first view, you're going to say it's evolution, because I favor the scientific answer to the religious one when they don't agree on something. Another possibility would be the second, which is that religion is favored when it conflicts with science. So in that case, looking at the different disagreement between creationism and evolution, a person with that second type of view would say, no, I hold the religious answer to be the correct one. I reject the scientist's claim. A third possible view is that they deal with different topics. So they're not even talking about the same stuff. that science deals with physical reality and cause and effect, and maybe some argue that that religion deals with a subjective reality and has to do with morals and values, and those things don't have anything to do with each other. Maybe some say that. A fourth possible view is that they actually are compatible and they agree. Maybe it doesn't seem like it sometimes because people say, oh, well, science claims evolution, religion claims creation, but some people would argue, oh, we can sort of interpret the things in a way where they kind of come together and say the same. Like maybe God did create us, but he wanted that to play out over a long-term process of evolution. So let's have it both ways. There's evolution and creation, you know. Or maybe someone would say that whereas the Bible claims the universe and man was created within a week, and science says that it took billions of years for man to exist, maybe the timeline in the Bible writings is just a metaphor, and a week doesn't really mean like 7 days. So there's ways to take either of those four views. And just to state them one last time, that science trumps religion when they don't agree, that religion trumps science when they don't agree, or number 3, that they deal with different topics, or number 4, that they are actually compatible. Okay. So from there, scientific theory versus scientific hypothesis. There's kind of 2 questions in one. So a hypothesis is an educated scientific guess to explain the occurrence of an observed phenomenon or problem. And a theory is much the same, except it's just a very well confirmed hypothesis. So theory is just a word which we give to a hypothesis when it has graduated to being very well confirmed. It starts off as a tentative hypothesis, but if it's been confirmed over and over and over again by a lot of different people working in independent circumstances, then it starts to appear as though it's true, and so a well-confirmed hypothesis is dubbed a theory. Okay. So from there, number 17 talks about the third step that the textbook refers to in the scientific method, gathering additional info and refining the hypothesis. That just means that once you have stated your hypothesis, before testing it, and after some initial data collection, you might see the need to make adjustments or modifications to the hypothesis. So based on your initial data collection, making any necessary edits or alterations to your first hypothesis. Okay? Then, the idea of consistency with established theories. That's a quality that good theories or hypotheses have. So consistency with established theories just means that the hypothesis, the theory, does not contradict others which have been well proven. It fits in with them, and it does not contradict them. Okay, because science is supposed to be a body of knowledge that is all coherent together. So it's not supposed to be that some theories contradict others. They're supposed to all mesh together and not rule each other out. Okay. Okay, next up we have falsifiability. What is falsifiability? It's a good thing. So a good scientific theory is capable of being proven false somehow. Falsifiability just means that. It just means when a theory is somehow able to be proven false. That doesn't mean that it is false. That doesn't mean that it will be proven false. It just means that we know what falsification would look like in case the theory was false. Only if there's falsifiability can a theory be tested. Because when you test your hypothesis or theory, you're trying to make sure that it does not get falsified. But if you have no idea what falsification would be, then you're not in a position to judge whether or not the test falsified the hypothesis. Okay, that's falsifiability. Then we have simplicity, or it's sometimes called Occam's razor. That one's not too bad. It's just the view that if you have 2 different explanations or hypotheses, which one's likelier to be correct? The simpler one. So if you have 2 different explanations for one event, the one of them that is simpler, meaning that it holds fewer assumptions, is the one that is likelier to be correct. And so the scientist will prefer the simpler hypothesis when comparing it to the more complex. Okay. the predictability assumption of science. That's the assumption that the universe is orderly and predictable, and because of that, established cause and effect relations will never change. They will always be repeatable, and they would hold and carry on forever. Okay, so like gravity, basically, we assume that it doesn't just work here and now, but it would always work the same way given the same physical conditions for all time and for all space. Okay. Now, the assumption of objectivity in science. That is the view that we can learn about the universe and world as it really is outside of us and with no bias. It's the belief that there are objective and truthful answers that we can discover about reality, and that we can get to those true discoveries without just talking about our feelings and our biases, so that we can get to like factual, matter-of-fact, objective answers about how things really are, and do so with no bias. That's objectivity, assumption of science. Now, pseudoscience, everybody. Pseudoscience is just like fake science. It's something that wants to look scientific, but it's really not. So it puts on the false appearance of being scientific when in fact it isn't. The textbook said it is a body of explanations that masquerades as science, but it's not scientific. And that includes fields of explanation like the horoscopes, or so we could say astrology, or numerology, prophecy, crystal balls, tarot cards, and all those kind of things. Yeah, so those are pseudoscientific. Then there's empiricism, last term from that chapter, but we've already covered it once in our midterm review also, because it's appearing in both halves of the semester. Just anyway, again, empiricism is the belief held widely by scientists that most human knowledge comes from the five senses and observation. So that's where most of our knowledge comes from. Scientists believe that. That's why the whole system of science is predicated on starting with observations. Okay, now after that, the only leftover remaining material is the Chapter 9 topics. So that's what we've most recently discussed in our semester here at the end. So I'll try my best to just kind of run through the notes that I have on that for you guys. Okay, so if you're still with me, thanks a lot, and appreciate you guys hanging in to the very end. This is the Chapter 9 topics. So first of all, what is ethics? Ethics is the study of morality and moral concepts. Okay, so that's all it is. It's the study of the moral and what is morality. Next up, moral reasoning. Moral reasoning is when you make a choice or decision about what is right or wrong, or about what you should or should not do. So it's when you're the moral judge, judging some conduct or your own conduct on a moral level. You know, so like, I don't know, you could look at people protesting certain actions, and you might feel, well, that's righteous, and I think it's good and right what they're doing. Or you might be opposed to the things they are protesting or their views. And you may say, that is wrong, and it's not good that they're doing that. When you're a judge of conduct in a moral way, you're moral reasoning. Sometimes you also think about your own behavior. Should I do this or should I not do this, morally speaking? And then you're also doing moral reasoning. Okay. There's three types of moral action, everybody. Let's not forget what those are. There's morally impermissible, morally permissible, and morally obligatory. Morally impermissible means that it's wrong and it's not okay, like killing or stealing, or just maybe lying. Morally permissible means that it is not wrong and it is okay. That covers a lot of ground. That could be, I don't know, going for a jog, eating, your favorite meal, but it also could include like service to others, dedicating time, money, blood, or whatever else to a greater cause. So there's a lot of morally permissible acts. Some of them are helpful to others, and some just don't harm others, but as long as it's not wrong, then it's in that category. And then the third is morally obligatory, meaning that you must do those, and it would be immoral not to do them. So I don't know, like not violating promises, not killing people and stuff, like those would be moral obligations too. Okay, moral values. Moral values are values that benefit you and other people, and they are considered good for their own sake. For example, like forgiveness, justice, compassion. Those are values that are a benefit to those who you exhibit that quality toward. They're also good for your own psychological well-being. And when they don't produce a productive outcome, they're still considered good just because they're good in and of themselves. But there's also non-moral values, okay? And so those are goal-oriented values that are only sought as a means to the end of your own pleasure and satisfaction. So that's like wealth, fame, popularity, prestige. Those are important too, and of course they drive our motives to do things. But the text mentions, and I think it's probably true, that you should have a healthy dose of both to have a balanced life, which is not merely self-obsessed. And that's also a key to deep happiness that has been studied. Helper's high. That's when you help other people and you have a good psychological feeling from doing that. Conscience. That's this internal source of knowledge about what is right and wrong. So you can tap into that and it'll indicate to you how you should or shouldn't act and what things are right and wrong. Moral tragedy. When you observe or witness some unjust action and you then become upset because of it. Oh no, I'm sorry. That term, I wrote the wrong term there. I intended to write moral outrage. So what I would ask for you, if you may, question 8 under chapter 9, strike tragedy, replace with outrage. I was defining the term moral outrage. There's also the term moral tragedy in the book, but I did not choose to focus on it with you guys. So that definition, moral outrage, when you witness some kind of injustice and become upset because of that, okay? Now number 9 talks about resentment. Resentment is a little more personal version of moral outrage. That's when you are the direct victim of the injustice and then become upset because of that. Guilt, a bad feeling that results from committing a wrong. And it's the bad feeling that comes from you doing something wrong, making you want to somehow correct or right the wrong. That's different from shame, though, because shame is a bad feeling that comes from violating a social norm. And violating social norms is sometimes not the same as committing an immoral action. So we should know the difference between guilt and shame. Now, there are 3 stages of moral development that were mentioned. The first was the pre-conventional stage, where you just think about right and wrong in terms of avoiding punishment. So it's very self-centered around your own self-interest. The second stage of moral development is called the conventional stage. That's when you seek to fit into social norms and expectations to be judged as a good boy or a nice girl. So that's where you actually care a lot about everyone else's attitudes and opinions, and you just want to fit into them. The third stage is the highest, and that's called post-conventional. That's where you apply universal moral principles to your moral judgments, and sometimes you allow that they can differ even from the views of society or its members. So that's when you have your own kind of moral compass, and you try to apply it to your conduct and your judgments, even when and if it's different from what most people think. Okay, so those are the 3 stages: post-conventional, pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. Then after that, moral relativism. Moral relativism says that morality is subjective, and therefore it's not objective, it's not universal. It's something that varies and can vary by the case. Moral universalism says the opposite, that morality is objective and universal, and there's one moral code that never changes, and it's the same for all people, places, and times. So you got relativism and universalism, contrasts. Now, within moral relativism, there are 2 types. There's ethical subjectivism, which says that morality is just personal opinion of the individual, and there's no more basis to it than that. Cultural relativism is another version of relativism which says it's not the individual's opinion that determines morality, but the society or culture they're in. So morality in that view comes from social norms, but they can differ from society to society. Now, what is a criticism of these relativisms? A criticism of moral relativism is that according to it, there's no objective fact about whether something is wrong. It just depends on the either individual or the society. But clearly, most of us probably would agree that there are some things that are fundamentally wrong, no matter who thinks that they're okay. So if you ask the serial killer, is killing people wrong? They might be like, no, it's fun. But don't we think that they're just objectively incorrect about saying that that's not wrong. So relativism has that criticism that it deprives you of the ability to say, like, for real, this is wrong, like objectively, not just in the person's mind or something. And it seems like almost anything could be permitted if you started to loosen your views about the relativity of moral judgment. Okay. Now, consequentialism just says that morality comes from the consequences of the things that you do. Utilitarianism is the view there that we actually studied in more detail. So I'm not going to ask you that consequentialism question, I don't think, but the utilitarianism question is fair. What's utilitarianism? It's just the theory given by John Stuart Mill in the 19th century, which says that you should always do whatever produces the most overall happiness for the greatest number of people. So the utilitarian says your moral compass should be do whatever produces the most happiness for as many people as possible. Who was the founder of utilitarianism? Well, there's actually two. There's Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, but we only talked about Mill, so I would just ask you to focus on him if I asked that question. John Stuart Mill was a British philosopher and economist who lived from 1806 to 1873, and he's the creator, one of them, of utilitarianism, so it's talking about him. Now, Kant, he was a German philosopher who lived from 1724 to 1804, and he's the creator of the Kantian ethics. Let's not worry about number 22, deontology. I don't think I covered that in enough depth, so not to worry about that one. But the categorical imperative, okay. What it says is you should only act on maxims that could be universal laws. So in other words, it's only acceptable morally to do actions which could be done by everybody without the whole system breaking down. So, you know, pay your bus fare, because if nobody paid, then the bus wouldn't operate. Don't cut in line, because if everybody cut, then there wouldn't even be a line. So think about what you're doing when you act, and if it's something that couldn't be done at a universal level, then it's wrong. That's what the categorical imperative says. Next up, just a few last things. Liberty rights. Those are rights to pursue your legitimate interests without interference. Think of the right to freedom of religion, speech, assembly, the Second Amendment right to bear arms, right? That's not the right to be given anything, it's the right to be left alone in the pursuit of a legitimate interest. What are welfare rights? Welfare rights are the rights to be given essential goods if you're not able to provide them for yourself. So like a right to, I don't know, education or food or water or healthcare. That's the provision of stuff if you're not capable of getting it through your own independent effort. What are legitimate interests? Those are interests that do not interfere with anyone else's interests. So like my interest to be alive is legitimate because that's nothing that hurts anybody else. But if I have an interest in like killing my neighbor, that's not legitimate because that interest would strike against their own interests. So legitimate interests are the interests that you have that don't interfere with anyone else's either. And then the last question is about virtues. What is a virtue? A virtue is a positive character trait. Things like honesty, compassion, generosity, courage. So they're desired character traits that have a moral, positive quality. And some people think that the best way to live morally is to try and have as many of those virtues as you can in your own person. Okay, so I tried my best to go over all the notes one last time with you guys Monday and then today. So from here, we've just got the final to worry about. I'm going to be grading, and I will grade all of your last homework submissions this weekend, and I'll be done with them before the end of the week. So I'll let you guys know when those are done, and you can check for your grades before the final, and you can know how you're doing in the class overall before the final. But that's it, and then you'll take your exam next week. So if there are any other questions, you could let me know, but I know we've run a slight bit over our time, so I want to let you guys go pretty much. Let me just leave you with one clear statement of the time and date of our final. Okay. If you're still here, maybe that's helpful for you. So when is it? It is the 11th. That means that it's Monday at 1 p.m. I'm telling you right now, Eduardo, it's Monday the 11th, 1 p.m. to 2:50 p.m. So I'll make sure to get the grading done well in advance of that Monday. I'll try to definitely get it done before the end of Friday. So then you can check with me over the weekend for your grades on everything and know that you're coming into the final with just that last little piece of work to do. So Monday, 1 p.m. I will send the final as I did some previous quizzes that you've taken through Titanium, and your obligation will just be to reply back with the answers as a file attached no later than 2:50 p.m. And then we're done with this class. So you guys will have a great summer, I hope, and better days ahead with the fall. Anyways, then, if any other questions remain and there's any other help that you'd like, let me know, and I'll be checking my emails every day. I may schedule a little brief review session for bonus time for anybody at the very end, but I'll let you guys know in the next few days. For now, then, take it easy. Thanks so much for all your hard work through the semester, and I'll be in touch. And try to get those evaluations done if you have a chance, okay? Thank you so much. Bye-bye.